Hello, everyone. Hopefully, this is all working. All right. Happy Sunday, everyone. Hopefully, all the sound is working okay. So, just can you give me a hello and where you're from in the chat? I know that people have to be subscribed to my channel for this particular live. So, I want to make sure that we have people able to come in and join. And so I'm just going to take a minute or two to just kind of make sure everybody's in. So thank you. All right, let me just double check here. Okay. I think there's a delay. Hi, Debbie. Thank you for coming from Texas. Nice to have you with me. Hi, Sandra from Washington State, Seattle. Hello. Welcome, welcome. All right, so I have prepared quite a few slides for today's live because this is a very important moment in the United States history. So we're going to be talking a lot about the questions that were prepared. Yes, Sandra. Yeah, we are neighbors from about 3-hour drive. So we're going to be talking about a little bit about the questions that you guys presented to me to answer questions with astrology. So I'll probably dive into those first. So then I'll bring in the astrology of the election day and also the candidates that are presented. But I also want to introduce something that I think is really important that is not as well known in the astrology community, but definitely should be out there. And I posted a podcast of kind of some raw video from a conversation that I had with one of my friends in astrology who is also a history teacher. And I met with him a couple of years ago, and we talked about the astrology of the United States of America and kind of the importance of looking at a few charts and not just one chart for the United States of America. And when I listened to his talk in 2022, I think it was, maybe that, yeah. So I wanted to meet with him because I thought that it was really, really important for others in the astrological community to consider Gary Lorenz's work. And I will be sharing a document with Gary's links to it. I might put it in the chat, but I'll definitely put it in the comment section of this live when I'm completed with it, because I have several links that I want people to explore and take into consideration about the history of the United States. And I think a couple of astrologers that come to mind that are really kind of working that astrology and have a deep deep passion for history. I mean, Gary was a history teacher, also astrologer, but also there's an astrologer by the name of Nick Dagan Best, who's done some work with the Uranus returns and things like that for the United States of America. He's got some great astrology that he's done in regards to that. And he was on the astrology podcast with Chris Brennan discussing that work as well. So there are multiple points of perspective that I want to make sure that people are aware of. I'm an evolutionary astrologer. And so a lot of my focus and my practice is about the individual. And there are astrologers who focus more on bigger themes, mundane astrology, and those kind of things. And I want to point that out, that it's very important to understand this background, because each astrologer, as they present very publicly, some will lean into doing a full-blown forecast, and I will have links in the description when this is completed, when I actually edit it at the very end, in terms of edit, meaning I'm just adding to the description, because I have so many things I want to add as a follow through that other people should take a look at, because there's more than one point of view. Okay. And I also think it's important about free will and people's free will to vote for who they choose, and having that. So my astrology today will be focused on the candidates, what's showing up in their natal charts, what's showing up in their transits of the moments now and coming into election day, and also secondary progressions and solar arcs. So you'll have that perspective. Now, there is a technique called Zodiacal Releasing and the releasing from spirit, which is focused in traditional astrology. And there are other astrologers who've done that. The first and who I've learned a lot from is Leisa Schaim. I'll have a link for Leisa Schaim's work on this. Others have quoted her, but she is probably one of the first that I think dared to step out on that that platform to speak of that. But you will notice in the video that I share from Leisa Schaim talking with Chris Brennan on the astrology podcast that she's also very cautious of how she put that information out, because it's a very sensitive subject with the energy in the United States is very polarized. So we have to be cautious about how we approach things. I am a person who believes that people have the right to choose. That's our privilege. It's our right to vote. It's our privilege to vote, and I think it's very, very important. Okay, and on the links that I'll have in the description of this video, when it concludes, will be both a combination of people who are leaning into Kamala Harris's win, and then there are people who lean into former President Trump's as a potential win. So I kind of think it's important to kind of look at all the information, look at all the arguments, and then you can kind of lean into that. Vice President Kamala Harris, there's a lot that we can take a look at in her career as well. So just want to point that out. So a couple of you also have joined. Hello, Little Red from Virginia, from the burbs of DC. You're right in the middle of it all in terms of the DC energy. And Lynn, hello, from Maryland. And Emma from France, Paris, France. Yes, one of our allies. Yeah, welcome. So hopefully, if you have questions that pop during the share today that I'm presenting, please do. And hopefully I catch them as we go. So, okay, so a couple of you, we're about 7 minutes past the hour, so I'm going to jump in. Oh, hello, Komilla from Brazil. Yeah, Brazil. Wonderful. Okay, so we're looking at a couple of things. I know that Sandra, you proposed several questions. Thank you so much for your questions. And I'm going to kind of point out the questions, repeat the questions here, and then we're going to talk about it. So when I'm talking about the astrology today, then I will point back to your question and show how that might present, okay? So you asked the question, like, how will we be able to get on, you'll ask me about how to get on the live, but you have managed that. It's through the channel on my page, of course. And you have to be subscribed, of course. But here the questions for the astrology are: what effects will Pluto have? And you mentioned Pluto will have aspects with several other planets, including opposition to Mars. And yes, we'll be covering that in depth about the Mars in Cancer, Mars in Leo, opposition to Pluto in Capricorn, and then Pluto in Aquarius. So we'll be discussing that. Absolutely, that's probably one of the very key things that's happening over extended period of time, because Mars is going to be going in retrograde. We'll talk about that and how that extends that opposition, and it's very intense, very it's fixed signs as part of that, but also Mars being then, when it's in Cancer, being in a cardinal sign. So there's a lot of emotional, a lot of desire to protect energy with that. And there's also just a great transformation going on. We'll discuss that too. Then your question also is, how will Saturn's positioning, Saturn is in Pisces, affect the charts of the two candidates? We'll talk about Saturn on each of their charts, okay? And what other astrological things might offset Saturn's effects. Saturn, the things that would offset Saturn are going to be your outer planets, because Saturn's going to do what it's the archetype of Saturn, but when it's in Pisces, it has a very different effect, or how it can make things you know, as manifest as we pay attention to something. Okay. So I'll discuss Saturn in Pisces, but I'll also discuss Saturn in Aries. This could be a very long live, just to let you know, but I'll do my best. And then, do you see indicators for legal challenges or delays in general? Yes, there, I think from a legal standpoint, we'll look at that, but in terms of delays, yes, I think there will be challenges in the because of delays, and that's because the Mercury retrograde. But there are other planetary things that may override that. So I'll talk about that. So there might be a slight delay, and then there could be some challenges as it presents. Okay. Other questions were, are there any date periods when there's more likelihood of violence or disruption after the winter is decided? That answer is yes, absolutely. And then number 2, what effects, if any, will the full moon? Yes, we're going to talk about the November 15th full moon have on the post-election day process. And because Uranus is on that full moon, that is going to be a very volatile full moon. And so it's a very poignant moment, absolutely. So if you're in terms of the astrology of that moment, absolutely. It can be a shocking thing, but it also can be unexpected events. I mean, as I've said in other astrology videos, that you've noticed that when I speak of Uranus, Uranus is quite unpredictable energy. So we have to kind of pay attention where it is at in the person's chart. What is the arc of the person's life? So as an evolutionary astrologer, I'm looking at the person's nodal axis. Like, what was their arc of life? And we have like an understanding that both of these individuals have gone through a lot of life. Kamala is 60 and Donald Trump is 78. So we have a huge amount of background history to kind of bring to the forefront, like in this moment now. And so you kind of look at how is the astrology sitting in the moment. Now, I also want to point out that astrologers also will use different techniques to look at things. I use a combination of evolutionary astrology, which is a Placidus chart, or when I'm looking at the soul perspective. But a lot of the astrology also has whole sign houses. So I've doubled up. I've done both kind of charts to kind of have a snapshot of both. I know that can be possibly overwhelming for some people, but I like to point out sometimes it's easier to see something by the perspective of how the houses are drawn on the chart. And I appreciate that. And also to just kind of pinpoint something that I think others who have listened to my other videos, when I do whole sign, it's kind of easy to see something in terms of energy, but it's also nice to see Placidus, where the angles are, and how that might look, just so you can see that. So, okay, so, all right, everywhere. Well, let me see. We're going to jump in, start sharing, so we can start getting into the content. So, a little bit of an intro there, trying to get into the questions. And again, let's look at. Let's see, I want to select a window. We're going to select this one. And we'll share. Okay. I have to go back here. Okay. All right. So the first thing, I have to click on this. Oh, I might need. Hold on one second, please. I'm still learning some of these tools, like how to see things nice and wide. Okay, bear with me here for a second. Okay. Let me see if I can make the view bigger here. Just a minute, please. Okay, you can see that okay? All right. So we're going to look at the election day chart here, just to kind of see the energy. I like to kind of look at the moon on the day of the election. So the day that 7 a.m. in the morning, I kind of think of when people are starting to go to the polls and what is the moon doing in the course of that day. So this is the election day we're using a Placidus chart so I can see the angles. And we're looking at November 5th, Washington, D.C., and we're looking at a Placidus true node chart. So the moon, as you can see here, is at 28 degrees of Sagittarius. So we have, I think there's a lot of people that will be in movement to go out to the polls and to vote. I think that's, a lot going on there. It's a fire energy. So that's positive. I think that's a positive kind of to get people out there. There can be a super lifting as you approach the day. There's that lift, but it's also, this is at the sunrise. Basically the sun is just across the horizon there at 13 of Scorpio. Mars has entered Leo, and so that's another fire energy to mark kind of the action to get into something. But because Mars is a fixed sign in Leo and it's squaring the sun, there's going to be it's intensifying things for the day. Okay. Then the moon over the day will move from the Sagittarius, late Sagittarius, and then enter into Capricorn. And I think, is that the next chart? Yeah, at the end of the day, at the end of the day, I wanted to look at where does the moon go, and it goes to 7 degrees of Capricorn. So when the moon enters into Capricorn, it's going to have a little bit more of a sense of, the moon in Capricorn tends to be more serious, more intense, looking at it has a somber feel to it. So there will be people will be feeling that intense feeling about that. I also think it's important to kind of look at the end of the day on the election day chart itself has the sun at 14. It's not quite opposing Uranus. And to me, that I kind of think there's going to be delay that has that break open when that actually reaches, when the sun reaches 25 degrees, 24 degrees of Scorpio. Okay, so I think there I can, there's something about maybe that's kind of in the wings, in terms of the energy. And then here's the opposition that I think is very important that's going on. And it's the vibe underneath everything, because it's the Scorpio, the intensity. That sun is in Scorpio, which rules Mars rules. So the Mars and sun are in mutual reception when the Mars is in Leo. So there's an easier communication, but Mars is intense. It has a lot to do with ego, a lot of energy that's outward because it's fire, it goes out, but because there's Scorpio sun underneath it, there's a lot with it, a lot of motion with it. So this is just an interesting process that has to be worked out. Okay. So I think what I want to point out is just that the sun will be ticking across, degree a day. And it's by November 16th is when the sun will be opposite that Uranus. Interestingly enough, that is right next to the November 15th full moon moment. So we will see full moon, and then this Uranus opposition with the sun kind of play out around 9:34 p.m. November 16th. And 16, if you're somebody who takes into consideration 16 from the tarot, is the Tower card, and it's also 16 is an awakener card. So there's something that we have to be paying attention to about the moment, the essence of the moment, and also that Mars is still transiting, and the Mars will transit over the ascendant around 9:41 p.m. Eastern Time, Washington, D.C. on that same day, November 16th. So to me, when Mars goes over the ascendant, there can be like a reactive thing that's happening in the United States with that energy, and it's going to be interesting to see what is that, right? That's important to point out. And then I kind of look at around 3-day window around major things, because they can activate, something can activate, be active, 3 days before the exact of something, and then 3 days after when there's something that I would call a trigger, to an astrological point. So I kind of look around that period of time, 3 days and 3 days. So leading up to the full moon, you're going to have heightened activity, and the full moon will kind of have it come open and be kind of like an awakener. So it's very volatile, and the information may surface, can be shocking as well. Okay, so and to be honest, it could be that, I mean, a large portion of those citizens of America who are United States of America who are voting can be in shock. So, it can lean either way, right? And it could be enraging for some people because they didn't get what they wanted. So I want to be, I think it's important for me to point out that when you have such a spectrum going on in the United States where there's such a polarization that's been happening, that you could have that, a good portion, what I say, 50-50. I don't know, it's 50-50, but it's quite a bit of people on either side of the camps, right? No matter, I think that's important to point out. So there can still be a majority of people who have a moment of shock and disappointment, and there can be volatile stuff because of that. So let's just hypothetically look at, if Kamala wins the presidency from the election, then you have a huge base that have supported Trump through many, many years that are going to be very upset, and there's going to be a lot of activity around that. If Donald Trump wins the presidency, there's a whole bunch going on with that, and there will be a lot of people who would be upset, maybe even violent, or they would want a course of action to make sure, double check, recount, whatever, that kind of process. So you see how it's kind of can be either or based on what people actually do when they actually go and vote. And so I think this is a very important to point out. Okay, there is going to be some unexpected things because that is what Uranus is all about. So I think there will be a bit of a delay. This is answering the question about the delay. I think there will be a delay, and we have not only the Uranus opposing the sun right there at that full moon, November 15th. That's one thing that makes me think there will be a delay, because there'll be a shocker kind of thing. But I also think it could be called within, 48, 72 hours after the election. We could, and then that's a delayed event as well. Do you know what I mean? It could be brewing, and then that kind of event kind of thing. That's possible as well. Another thing that's happening is, this is Mercury. Mercury is going to be going retrograde. And this, I think, is important, on top of Mars setting up to go retrograde. But Mercury's happens first. And I think I want to point out that Mercury's retrograde is so important because of when that happens. So bear with me here for a second. I have my notes down here. Okay, so Mercury goes retrograde. It stations retrograde on November 25th. So just, a little bit over a week and a half after, just 10 days after, 11 days after the full moon. 10 days after the full moon. And it stations retrograde at 22:40 minutes of Sagittarius, which is the kind of where that Venus is right there. Let me just see what my next chart is. I'll go into that one later. Okay. Yeah. So what I think is important about the Mercury retrograde, it goes up to 22:40 by November 25th, and then it will station retrograde. So it makes that part of the chart a little bit activated at 22 degrees, 40 minutes, Sagittarius. And then it will retrograde back through all of that Sag, and it will station direct on, I think it's December, it's 6 degrees and 23 minutes of Sagittarius. And that happens December 15th, I think. Bear with me for a second. My notes are all over the place here. And during that retrograde, I think one of the things that's going to be important about that retrograde with Mercury is that when it hits about 12 degrees of Sagittarius, it will square that Saturn. And that, to me, is a critical moment, kind of a karmic moment, because Saturn is kind of karmic. And Mercury is in Sagittarius, which is the activation around beliefs When you have Saturn in Pisces, Neptune in Pisces, you have a lot of illusion that's been created. And these are moments of where disinformation is active and can have like revealing moments, or, you know what I mean? So this could be like people are activated about false information or information that doesn't needs to come to light, like that's been underneath something. So this is important, okay, to keep in mind about the Mercury retrograde, and that square is super important with that. And the other part of the retrograde is it leaves the shadow on January 3rd. So it finally kind of takes gets out of those it gets beyond the 22-40 minutes of Sagittarius. And why is that important? Because you kind of have to go through, when you go through a Mercury retrograde as a collective after some kind of big event and something big important, this is kind of a moment to kind of review something, look at something. So geez, that could also mean that we have to go through a process of reviewing the information to get back to the other side of that when the Mercury finally releases out of those shadow degrees. It's still a little fuzzy, maybe even when Mercury is in Sagittarius, but then it will eventually make its transit into Capricorn, and things will be a lot more clear and definitive when that occurs, okay, in early January. But I think it's important to, when you're asking the question, is there delay? Well, Mercury gives you kind of that delay. Mercury in Sagittarius is, there might be some legalities that have to take place. Sagittarius, you know, some of the legal things that may take place as a part of that equation of things coming out, okay? So hopefully that answers that question. Let's see here, what else? Let's see. Bear with me for a second. November is loaded with so many things. So we also have the Pluto in this chart is important to point out because it is opposite the Mars, but it is finishing off the Capricorn, and it's kind of like Capricorn's. We can do a review of Capricorn, Pluto through Capricorn on another time. But what's important is kind of like it's been dredging up the things that need to die in the systems as they are. And United States, you know, origin, you know, the Pluto is at 27 degrees of Capricorn. So we have been in the death throes, as you will, of the, you know, what does that mean for us? What is this? What is our authority? What is our the state of our systems? And these kinds of things are, you know, kind of like what's under transformation as it pertains to our values, right? So that Pluto, as it goes into Aquarius, and November 19th, I have a chart for that, but I think it's important just to point out, like, that's happening this month, right, just a couple of days after that full moon. So we have just a lot of things that, you know, clock in, and each thing is important. Now, Pluto is going to stay in Aquarius for 20 years. So this is the transformation. I want you to think back in your history about United States when it was becoming a nation. And I want to point out my next chart for that, okay? The United States, a lot of astrologers use the Sibley chart. And I think the Sibley chart, based on the information that I gave on with my conversation with a history teacher and an astrologer, Gary Lorenzen, is one of the best astrologers kind of that I have learned in the last 5 years was from Gary. I've been talking to Gary since before 2015 or something. I just love his astrology. And I think it's important to point out something about, you know, having a grasp of the history of the United States like Gary does. And I passionately feel about, like, you know, the birth of a nation is just not one moment. It's kind of like these, but there is one moment where people stretched out their necks and, you know, they would have been considered treason by their vote. And that was our forefathers that basically signed the Declaration of Independence, but they had to make a vote. And if you watch any, I love movies on the history, or if you love watching Hamilton, that'll invite you into, the historical notes of the United States of America. But the independent vote in the United States was July 1st of 1776. And here's the date, LAT time, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And this is Gary's chart. So I want to give credit to Gary. What I find important is like how the themes, because I always like, the Sibley chart gave the United States an Aquarian moon. And I kept like, you know what, if we had an Aquarian moon in the United States for real, we would not have the issues that we are presented with constantly about women's rights, equal rights, these kinds of things. And there's a struggle because this vote, that moment that vote took place on July 1st, that led to the edits on the Declaration of, the Declaration of Independence, then the edits, then it being published. There's multiple charts, and I want to point to that. But this was an interesting chart because I'm like, I want to take a look at that chart as it pertains to this moment in time, because I like to step back and look at things in a macro view, like, wow, it's interesting. The ancestors of the United States of America, like how we started forming as a nation, were, trying to separate from a king, and that is a symbolic thing that I think is kind of interesting, that we're trying to throw ourselves, the citizens are trying to throw off a personality that thinks like a king, acts like a king. And, here we are in this pattern. It's more of a pattern, and how we might be activating that whole pattern of trying to throw off and reclaim our independence of that kind of ideology and things like that. So I think that's number one. Like when I look at big patterns, I think, what are we doing as a collective? How are we operating? I cannot, there are multiple things that come up with Donald Trump. And as a soul, every soul is learning something. Every soul is evolving, but sometimes they play a significant role in their life that actually helps others see, because they show us something that we need to see, So there's something to that. I'm going to say that. But I think it's interesting when we look at the United States and that independent vote. We had Chiron at that moment at 20 degrees of Aries. And I think that is super important because it comes up again. And they had the opposition, of course, them as a people. The moon is like the people when you're looking at mundane astrologies, and separating from the mother, a sun in Cancer, right? So there's something about that. And then I noticed they also had these trines of energy between earth signs, the trine of with Taurus, Virgo, with the Neptune in the Virgo, and the Pluto. So they've got some Earth in that trine. But they also, I think, is maybe more powerful is the air, where you have the south node of that moment in Aquarius. So when Pluto eventually comes over that south node in a couple, 4 or 5 years, that's an important period of time. And also, so there will be south node things that we are transforming and learning about ourselves. We have to kind of go through a process of dredging up our shadow as a collective people and figuring that out. And then Saturn in Libra is very powerful. Saturn in Libra is super powerful. It is in its exaltation in traditional astrology. So it has an interesting power there. And also in terms of ninth house, that's like very powerful legally, right? So there's something about the US law, okay? And then we have the interesting combination of Mars in Gemini and Venus in Gemini, those personal planets, as a part of the air. So I think I wanted to just point that out because of a couple of things, because when I look at charts, I look at what might be repeating in future charts and why that may be. So I wanted to point that out, okay? And of course, this is 248 years ago when we're looking at that chart, okay? So jumping into the next one. Now we're looking at Election Day this year. Now we have the United States independent vote in the center, and then we have Election Day at the end of the day. I want to look at the end of the day, okay? What are we looking at? Look at there. We have Chiron at 20 degrees of Aries. It's retrograde, so it's coming back to that. So it's a revisiting. And Chiron is it's a centaur kind of, it's in between Uranus and Saturn. So it's kind of like a messenger between kind of anything Saturn, so things that are materialized in the world, and then kind of outer, what is transpersonal, that is not something that humans direct, but it's kind of like more divine energy in. And to me, I think of it as these moments like when Chiron's involved, we're looking at our wound. So we're looking at our wound about our identity, the right to exist as we are, as sovereign. You know, that to me is like the right to exist, Chiron in Aries. So isn't that interesting that that's on the table November 5th? So people showing up in the polls, both, you know, parties, I have the right to exist. There's a wound there, as I am, right? So it's kind of fascinating. That's on the you know, on the chart for the election day at the end of the day, right? Also at the beginning of the day, but I'm bringing in the chart from the end of the day. We also have Jupiter on the end of the election day, you know, right before midnight. It's in retrograde coming to the Mars in Gemini. So it kind of speaks to the duality of the moment, like this and that, like the variables on that. So it's expanding that spectrum as we're sitting in election day, like these two choices, right? And so that's actually accentuating that. And so both sides having lots of energy towards that, the right to exist. We also have over here at the first house, this is based off of the independence vote chart, of course. The moon is coming off of the, right there on the ascendant, like within 2 degrees of that. So I was like, wow, that's interesting that the moon is so close to the ascendant of that independent vote chart. And then it's approaching its actual return of the moon onto that other chart. So I was like, well, okay, this is a serious matter. And the moon in Capricorn feels duty driven to something. So there's like this in the people. So I think that's a fascinating point there. In the, as you can see, the Capricorn Pluto here, and with the US independent, right? So you can see that Pluto return still happening because it's active still. And even when it goes into Aquarius, we're going to see kind of, think of the, go back in your history books. It's like, go back into history, go back in your history books. It's valuable to kind of consider what were all the changes that would happen, you know, including wars that, you know, we had to fight for that freedom. And once we were declared, I mean, you're part of that declaration. So it's possible that that's happening within the United States. But it may happen also that it's happening in the world. And then we're having to respond also by things that are happening even outside our borders. Because if you recall, United States and France also have very interesting connections as allies, and how that was the beginnings of the United States. So kind of pay attention to what are our allies, what is happening in the world with our allies, with that Pluto going into Aquarius as well. And then what is happening, you know, broader in the world that impacts us collectively as well. Okay, so I want to bring that in. I think I've covered a lot of what I wanted to cover on that chart. So here's the Pluto re-enters Aquarius in the DC area, and look at Pluto at the top of the chart. So that re-entry is November, I didn't type that in, but it's November 19th at 3:30 p.m. And on that chart, I look at the reports. I didn't pull up the reports, but basically the moon is out of bounds. And when the moon is out of bounds, that means to me that there's a lot of more emotion, and there's a more passionate kind of desire to protect, because when a moon is in Cancer, it wants to nurture, it wants to care. But you think of that under, you know, kind of operating as it's still kind of, it's only 10 degrees of an opposition. It's close also. It's like, so to me, this is like that, energy of desire to protect, and it's also emotional, lots of emotions. Okay, so that re-entry of Pluto has some emotions around it. So there could be, like, after that full moon on November 15th and all the stuff that's happening on the 16th, as I've outlined, and I kind of give it like a 3-day. That part of the calendar this month is very volatile, and so this could be highly emotional, right? And then the out of bounds make it even more wild, and so it can be a little bit more chaotic in that regard. Mercury is also out of bounds. So the personal planets, 3 personal planets, are out of bounds, meaning they're acting like a little bit wild. Okay, and the Mercury is out of bounds at 25 degrees 30 minutes up here. Where is that? Right here at 20 degrees of Sagittarius, and that's right before it's stationing retrograde. And Venus out of bounds at 25 degrees of, oh, these are the declination, excuse me. That's the declination point. It was at 25 degrees on the declination, but Venus is sitting at 9 degrees Capricorn. And I think it's interesting that Venus is at 9 degrees Capricorn, because in other charts, as you'll see, Venus in Capricorn is actually an important planet combination for the beginnings of the United States of America. We'll go into that in a minute. Okay. Let's see here. This is 2025 transits. Do I want to use that one right now? Hold on one second. Let me see. This one is February 23rd. Okay, this is when Mars stations direct. So Mars is going to have its retrograde period. And let me pull out some of the dates on the Mars retrograde here. I have those here. So Mars retrograde is important because Mars is a planet that activates within us our passions and our action, the will, and instincts. But in Hellenistic traditional astrology, which is not evolutionary astrology, it is more Hellenistic tradition practice, you know, Mars is one of the malefics, and Saturn is a malefic. So Mars going in its retrograde, Mars being in Cancer is in its fall. Mars has a harder time in Cancer realizing, manifesting something, okay? It has a deep desire to protect. It's passive aggressive. It has all these combinations. So, of course, I want to point out that evolutionary astrology doesn't look at it that way. So I want to just make sure you understand the lens that I'm looking at the thing. So when Mars stations direct, I wanted to take a look at the chart, because here it is. Mars stationing direct has, guess what? The moon at 14 degrees of Capricorn, which I think is very, when I looked at that, it's like, oh, Mars is stationing direct in February 23rd, and it's opposite the moon. So Mars opposite the moon. And they're both cardinal. So to me, that means that something can activate. And we also have the ascendant of the moment and the descendant also cardinal. So we have cardinal on every angle. So to me, there can be things that actually do happen and materialize from that moment. Now, the moon is in Capricorn, which from a traditional standpoint is in detriment, because it's actually in its domain when it's in Cancer. Okay. So we have like this combination of Mars not very strong and Moon not very strong from a traditional astrology standpoint, but they are in each. The Mars is in the Moon sign, so there's something kind of connected between the Moon and the Mars, because the Mars is sitting in the Moon's sign, but the Moon is not sitting in Mars sign, so we're not sitting. But it does have. I mean, Capricorn is Mars's exaltation in traditional, so there's an affinity there, if that makes any sense. But I think it may be more important that is it's sitting in an opposition, so there's this tension that can happen, and it's emotional, and the Moon will feel a duty responsibility, but the Mars is really activated, right? And of course, it's activating other things, because we have Chiron sitting square to that. We have Black Moon Lilith in the first house also squaring. So we have kind of this energy squaring off. Okay. There are other things to take into note. So let me just pull up another transit too. This particular Mars direct, February 23rd, in 2025. This is in relation to looking at it from the Independent Vote United States chart, okay? And I think I was like, okay, wow, we have the Saturn of this moment also opposite the Neptune in Virgo, which is a really interesting combination of high intense energy that's being activated at that moment. But we're looking at Mars specifically, and Mars being on the midheaven of the moment, meaning it's very visible and it's activating at an angle, as you can see, because that midheaven is at 15 degrees of Cancer, and then the moon in the first house activating the moon of our original, that independent vote, you know, the fight for freedom, that vote that the ancestors, we are part of that as an idea, and, you know, sitting in the United States, you know, the citizens and those who are in the United States, this is being activated in our history, okay, to this present moment being carried forward. And then also the Chiron, you know, at the return. So there's that wound that we're all kind of looking at. And then also the ascendant of the moment has is sitting right on the Saturn in Libra. Okay, so there's a responsibility to peace that I think is a part of the identity of the United States of America, but it sits more in the legal. It's very strong legal. What's going on then within our legal world, and our, you know, all of the from the Supreme Court to the federal judge and all of the, consider all of the judges that Donald Trump appointed during his period of presidency. What does that come into the picture here? This is important kind of to take into consideration how things in our legal system are now, you know, how do they look, right? Also, what happens, you know, what happens in, say, in a new era, you know, when, you know, if and when Vice President Kamala Harris is elected president, would there be something that is happening at that executive branch towards the legal, you know, the seats of the Supreme Court? How does that, you know, because of the way that played out between the transition from Obama and Trump and all of that, you know, what went down in terms of the Supreme Court. There was so much around that. And I think there's a sensitivity to that in our systems. And I think I want to point that out. And here's this Mars direct. There's so much energy kind of pointing in that direction, right? So that's interesting. What else do I want to point out on this chart? This is because 2025 and 2026 are very, actually it's like 5 years for the United States, but it's kind of like a step, you know, things unrolling and being activated, just like in the beginning of the United States of America after 1776, how things were rolling out and coming to light. So it's a great period of time to bring up your history books, okay? What else do I want to point out here? We're still also in this unique period before, this is right before the Neptune is still at the end degrees, like 28 degrees of Pisces. Saturn is in Pisces, but we're marching forward to in 2025 for those to change signs. And so I do have that in here as well. Okay, so this is, oh, this is maybe going back to this year. So December 6th is when Mars stations retrograde. I need to jump back on this one. So it stations retrograde here, right, activating. Now at the center of this is the independent vote US chart, okay? And this is Mars at 6 degrees of Leo activating the north node of that chart. Huge, because that is kind of, to me, activating that we need to act, and we're looking at you know, your freedoms, your ideas, your ideologies are kind of being activated because the sun is in Sagittarius, that's in the fire. Mercury's in the retrograde, we're revisiting things, but at the same time you have Mars activating. So you could also have, if it's Mars is in someone's chart in Leo. It's activating that kind of ego that needs to say something out loud. So we're going to see a lot of that. Okay. People are going to be sharing more about their thoughts on things. And this is in early December, right? So post election day, we're going to have this still going on and being very active and very tense, because now we have Mars stationing, making that 6 degrees of Leo very hot and active, meaning that if anything erupts on this day in particular, then it has such a carry over a long period of time, because it makes it a very sensitive part of the charts. Okay, but it's absolutely hitting on the North Node of the independent vote chart, right? So to me, it's very the arc of the life of the independent vote of the United States of America. So it's kind of like pointing in the direction of being active and involved, but at the same time, there's a transformation that's going on, because now Pluto has now re-entered November 19th into Aquarius. It's opposing that Mars. So you have great opposition going on. You're having maybe, because when Pluto first entered into Aquarius in 2023, March 23rd, 2023, AI was coming in. Okay, so we're dealing with, when Pluto, we have AI, we have the how powerful or how concerning are we about social media and how it influences us, what, privacy, I mean, all these subjects. And now there's going to be some great things that happen when Pluto's in Aquarius, because we will go through technology, we'll go through quantum leaps. The question will be, should we create that or not, right? Like, does this help us? Because we are becoming more and more aware of the challenges of social media, like the Instagram, Facebook, these kinds of things, and how people get one piece of information and that actually polarizes even more, or it can be sabotaged by having false information hit that in volume. There are so many things that we're going to be transforming, and with that, we'll maybe have laws that take place. So technology is going to be going through it. Okay. It'll be fast, but it'll also be, we will start having the pressure cooker on, how powerful we actually are as human beings and what we create. And then what's the cause and effect, right? So there's this difficult dance with that. Hi, Tamasha. Thanks for your question. Is March 2025 looking heavy as well? Yes. Also, oh, thank you. Thank you. So yeah, so we have that December 6th. It's kind of like, if I like to encourage people to try to be optimistic. I mean, I have, the sun in Sag in the 9th house. So I go about things optimistic, but I can have moments when things hit my own chart. And then I have a moment where I'm like, I need to take a bet. I need to take a rest. I need to take step back from that thing. For example, I mean, back in 2015, 16, I was passionately engaged online, having conversations politically. And I took a step back, because that one, I had to take a step back. So I actually don't pay attention closely as some other people, or even as I used to how things are presented. I know that my husband, I'm very close with my husband. I know that he's a voracious reader, and we will talk about things as we play cards and whatever. But there's so much sensationalism that's done online that I have to pull back. Otherwise, I wouldn't be as calm as I am these days because of that action. So it's like, take care of yourself. And, if you have neighbors, it's very important to kind of, who's in your circle, who are you in your local community. This is very important right now. Okay. And just kind of watching out for people. I mean, because we have big things that are, unfolding just on us as collective. I mean, look at the weather recently and how displaced people still are in North Carolina. These kinds of things are more bottom line, more important in how we handle that as a collective just for our humanity, right? And so I think that's important to pay attention to. But we have all of these things happening at the same time. And I think it's important to kind of take care of yourself as the best you can, but make sure that you have a circle that you also have close to you in your local community. If for any reason there would be something that would be challenging, that you watch out for each other. You know what I mean? I think that bottom line, that's super important, okay, to take care of yourself and take care of your energy. Okay, continuing on to the challenging astrologies that we're going to be all navigating. I think another thing that I want to point about, like the Mars retrograde, and this is just on the DC. It's in the 8th house. I thought, okay, that's in the 8th house. That Mars, it kind of makes me think about our collective debt in the United States and how we, might have to work through our debt as a nation and our debt with other nations, because the sun of the Leo is in the 12th house Sagittarius of that chart. I kind of always things will pop on me when I'm looking at a chart, and I kind of thought about the debt and how real it is in the United States, and kind of it's in our face, and how that could have an unfolding, how we're going to be able to take care of ourselves, but also just how we have self-identified. There's so many things. For example, whenever we're involved in war, or if we are involved in supporting an ally, there's money involved, right? And so there's money. I mean, there is something about the money. You follow the money in things about war and conflict, and where the United States position is, and what is our identity there. We have, to consider these kind of things that collectively, those voting citizens are deeply passionate about, and our position on these things. Okay, some, we have been, we have things that we have to identify and acknowledge about ourselves and our history as a nation, collectively. And that's a part of, like, if you're a citizen in the United States, you have to acknowledge, like, yeah, we have this history, and we have to acknowledge that history and how we can step forward. There's a lot there, a lot of shadow that we have to work through collectively. Okay, I'm just gonna say that. But we individually have our own things and how we might tie into it. So you can have something that's very personal, and you're connected into the larger picture, the macro picture, because maybe you're struggling for finding a job after a job loss or something like that. So you're affected by that financially into that whole picture, right? Or maybe you're struggling to have a home and you're tied into that. There's all these themes that hit people on the personal level that are tied into a macro picture. Okay, so there's something to that. Okay, so let's jump in now to Vice President Kamala Harris. Any questions, others that might jump in right now on more of the United States stuff? I think we're okay so far. Doing all right. If you can like this, that helps for the future. I know that folks have to be subscribed, but it does help the channel. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Okay, let's jump into Kamala. This is Kamala's chart. She was born October 20th, 1964, 9:28 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, Oakland, California. I'm looking at her whole sign chart here. I did both whole sign and Placidus, because I want to show you some important things that you can see easier by the chart. Okay, whole sign is just, the whole sign. The rising sign makes the whole first house. So her rising sign is Gemini, and she has that ascendant right with the North Node, meaning her life is directing her towards her self-identity and Gemini, and so her Mercury is very important. And so let's see here. Her Mercury is in Scorpio, so she was a very strong prosecutor. She has a strong, does the research, does the homework, kind of like sixth house homework, does the homework kind of thing. But it's also, we could argue that she could miss some things because that Mercury is in the sixth house. It is what they call in aversion to the first house that's a whole sign traditional point of view. Okay. And we also look at, she was born in the 60s, in the mid 60s, with the Uranus and Pluto generation. She has Uranus and Pluto conjunct each other in Virgo at 1314 with Venus there in Virgo, which is in that kind of squares that energy. So she has these planets square the nodes, meaning these are big things for her in her life experience that will come online, and it's then opposing Chiron in Pisces in the 10th house of career, and her career midheaven, 10th house also Pisces. So Jupiter is super important. So when we're looking at Kamala, we want to look for her career. Jupiter is important, but it's also Mercury is important because it's her ascendant. Okay. There's also the sun. She has a very powerful sun, Libra, peace, justice. That's a social justice kind of Libra powerhouse. And it is trine, mega trine, that ascendant north node. Okay. So there's many things that sun has the most power across all of, truly across in terms of the personal planet stuff and the power to the first house. So to me, that's an interesting thing that she's bringing towards her self-identity that she's sharing with the world, but it's also her strength in that regard. Her strength with career is under Jupiter, and Jupiter is in the 12th house, but 24 of Taurus, which means that she has, by working through for the public, that Jupiter is working with the public. Okay. So that's important to point out that Jupiter is in a very, very interesting position as it pertains to working with the public in a meaningful way. Okay. But it is retrograde and is in the 12th house. So there's something about that from a traditional standpoint that is like it's kind of behind the scenes. So maybe a lot of the things happening behind the scenes has that powerhouse to it. So in terms of how it influences her career. Okay. So think of all the committees that she's been on and collective things that she's been working on together and her role in that. Okay. And as she's risen to power, there's some of that, as well. Okay. What else I want to put out on just her chart? Now, here's her chart from a Placidus standpoint. I just want to show you the Placidus so you can see that the North Node is right on her angle. So to me, her life is directing her towards this North Node, and her South Node is about understanding the opposition, partners. So partners have a kind of a past life scenario attached to them. And it's also like something that she has this going on with the collective something, because I kind of look as the unconscious mind is connected to the collective. Okay. And so Jupiter's sitting in there. And so she has to she's aware of it. Right. So, but she's also she has that Sagittarius South Node. So that's kind of the law. So she went back into that when she came this life. Right. So it's kind of bringing that forward. What is her strength as a prosecutor has a lot to do with that. What she did as a public servant to that. And then as she became, her roles in the Senate and then so forth. So I think that's important to point out that history that brings that kind of like forward, right? And how she's very much paying attention and also activated by things that are happening by seventh house. Okay. Because a lot of seventh house energy, Jupiter is responsible for that. Okay. So in terms of an election, herself coming forward, and then also opponent would be that seventh house. Okay. What else I want to point out here? Oh, she has an Aries moon. I love that she has an Aries moon. That means she's a fighter. And she is a bulldog in terms of what she's going to go after. And she's born on a full moon. So she has the Libra. So what she believes in and the social justice frame is also valuable, like how that's her essence. That's what that she lives and what she acts on. But her moon is how the emotion part is. I need to be, I want to go be first. But I want you to keep in mind that when a president is sitting, so we have President Biden sitting right now until this election is over, and then the inauguration day, right? So we collectively are attuned to the moon and also other aspects of the sitting president as a collective people. We have our own chart as an independent vote and all those kind of histories with that. But to me, it's so interesting to see the dynamic of full moon and then what that moon is. Moon in Aries is, I want to go for it. I want to be first, but it's raw energy. It's passionate energy, and it is going to fight for what it deems is right for itself, right? So this is like a very powerful individual with the desire for social justice, peace, but also looking for the balance and equilibrium, and also strong Mars and Leo communicator, and that's going to communicate those themes of the sun. Okay, peace, but sometimes to get to peace, you have to be the fighter. Okay, important here, and it's an important moment in history. If you want to like place your bets on someone who could fight the fight, I think that's also in Vice President Harris's chart. Okay, the need to consider that might be very important. Okay, and especially on the world stage. Okay, so that's Kamala's natal chart. Anything else that I want to point out here? There's a massive transformation that with anyone born in those 60s with the Uranus and Pluto conjunction in Virgo is that's Gen X, okay, and early Gen X. But this is like that new cycle. And Richard Tarnas is an astrologer who did a huge series, and I'll put that detail below of how you can go look up the work that he's done. He's got a book called Cosmos and Psyche. It goes into these collective moments where we push out collectively, like the 60s is the emerging moment, but it's also kind of other moments in time when those major planets come together, and then when they square, and they were squaring for 7 times in like 2010 through 2015. So that was the square. So to kind of like have the potential of a sitting president to have this combination in their birth chart is actually quite powerful as it pertains to what it's going to activate for us collectively. So I think that's important. But it's also working on this wound, the Chiron in Pisces, about our beliefs and that regard of the public persona. I mean, that is something that's up there as well. So they are reflecting back to us something about ourselves, our spiritual beliefs, our beliefs, and our connection to something bigger. Okay, that's Pisces. Pisces is like the whole zodiac. Okay. Okay, so I've hopefully pointed out some good things on her natal chart from both perspectives of the whole sign house and the Placidus perspectives. Okay. Okay, now we're looking at Kamala's detail on November 5th. And this is at 7 a.m. So starting off the morning, what it looks like, where's the things positioned. And that's the beginning of the day because we have the moon in Sagittarius still. Here it is, 7 a.m., 29 degrees, Sagittarius. Starting off the day with a lot of activity, in terms of people going out, voting, and these kinds of things, of course. But here's what's interesting is this Uranus on Kamala's Jupiter. Remember, I mentioned how important her Jupiter is because it pertains to this. So there's like this interesting combination of unexpected things happening about the opponent or even her spouse. Okay. Hopefully not anything too negative, but there is this kind of unexpected things happening. So I want to point that out. Jupiter is also on the ascendant. Okay. Jupiter is within 4 degrees of the ascendant. It is retrograde, and it's also the vertex is close by, but I like the vertex to be within a degree. And we have the lot of fortune, which is are things happen to you and for you, in the 4th house of home. And but that's also pertaining to her work because the Mercury is like the ruler of that. So I think that also we have to take a look at Mercury, because Mercury is at 3 degrees of Sagittarius, and it's, in the beginnings, but it's going towards where it's going to like retrograde from that point where Venus is and then retrograde back, right? So Mercury has a few more days before it gets up to that point. So there's a lot of interesting points of how things kind of start the day on election day for Vice President Harris. Okay. We also have Saturn so close to the Chiron of her chart in the 10th house. But to me, Saturn can also be like a person could be handed a big responsibility. Okay, so there's something to that. The nodes of the moon at the moment, I always like to look, what's the nodes? What's going to be interesting is the nodes of the moon are 5 degrees. South node is Libra. North node is Aries. So the north node is fire. We have the fire of the Mars, and that transiting Mars is 0 degrees Leo that day. So that's a powerhouse of energy of fire, of activating that north node. And also the moon then will move into Capricorn, as I was saying, through that day, and then it will square. So it will be like some challenges, right? So the challenges are going to present as the days go on, as it pertains to the transiting nodes and that squaring off, right? So to me, that could be like there's some things that have to go through a process for it to be figured out. Okay. Okay. So next chart. How are we doing? We're at 2 o'clock my time, 12. So we've already been talking for an hour. So let's see here. Hope you're all doing well, because we're an hour in. But let's continue. Okay, so this is the Placidus chart of the same beginning of the day, of the election day. Same things I'm pointing out. You can just see that the Jupiter in the 12th house with the Uranus touching it. And in the 8th house, we have the Pluto that's at 29 Capricorn. I think that's actually more powerful when we look at the chart with a whole sign house, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But it's definitely, there's transformation that's going on underneath things in from an 8th house perspective. Okay, things that aren't visible that will maybe become visible for people later on, but right now they're not going to be that visible, or it won't be as visible to her. What else? The Venus is rising. I guess it's going to actually, by the click of the day, it's actually going down. So it's already passed over that. So I wouldn't say that. It's rising if it's over here. So Jupiter is rising. Okay, so that's what we're looking at there. Okay, let's move on. So under the progressions, now progressions are an advanced technique. We're looking at the 60 days after Kamala was born in 1964. This is what the planets would have looked like in the heavens. And we look at the moon and we look at the sun where it's progressed. And that kind of tells us a little bit more information about kind of the moment for Vice President Harris. And we can see that the moon has progressed into her 2nd house by whole sign, of course. And we're looking at the moon in Cancer, has power to it. The sun is Sagittarius. Her sun has progressed to 28 of Sagittarius, which is very close to the actual moon the morning of. That's interesting. So her progressed sun gets activated by the election day morning. And then Venus is sitting right on the descendant line excuse me. The ascendant descendant is 24. Excuse me. So Venus is entered into her 7th house by whole sign. That's better. So there's something to that energy, which is that's the ruler of her natal sun in Libra, right? I was kind of like, what's the natal sun's planet doing in progressions? So it's in Sagittarius, it's in fire. So that would be a trine to the Mars and Leo energy. Okay. So she's getting that energy from the Mars active towards a trine towards the Venus by what takes place. And then we also have the midheaven, the Saturn. I really don't often look at the progressed of the Saturn in a chart because it moves so slow, but because the Saturn is actually in Pisces, it's progressed through time from Aquarius at 28 in her natal chart to being in Pisces. Well, Saturn's in Pisces, so it's kind of interesting that her progressed Saturn is also in Pisces, so there's kind of a responsibility that has a different shape to it than what but she has a very powerful natal Saturn in Aquarius in a sign that it is it's in its domain, so it has a very strong ability to realize things and manifest things. So by its progression into Pisces, it just takes on a different energy, but she has the power underneath it with all her air in her chart. Okay, she has 27 Sun in Libra, 28 Saturn in Aquarius, and 24 Ascendant North Node in Gemini. So that powerhouse of air in Kamilla's chart is quite incredible. And so I'm really curious to see how that Jupiter transiting so close to her ascendant and trining that activating that part of her chart as we are sitting at election day. So that'll be interesting. Okay. How are you guys doing that are listening so far? Doing well? So if you have a comment, please share. Okay. So we have looked at a couple of Kamilla's charts. What else we got here? I've got the full moon moment. I think this is a critical moment, as I had mentioned before. But here we can see it with a Placidus chart. And a Placidus chart is basically a quadrant chart. It kind of gives us more angles showing up, like this is the angle of the self and other. So the ascendant, descendant, you can see the angle sharply. And then you can see the angle of the career house, which is from that perspective there to there. And it also gives us like cusps. And I like the Placidus because it's from a beginner standpoint, it's nice in terms of looking at quadrant houses. Anyway, from time-based things. So if you want to have cusps, it's nice to have. So here we can see one of the biggest things I think is at the new moon moment, excuse me, at the full moon moment, correction there, the full moon moment, the ascendant of the full moon is 17 Taurus. The moon would be in the first house of the actual moment, but on Kamilla's chart, it's in their 12th house and it's activating her Jupiter. Look at that. And right next to it is Uranus. And that to me is very, very, something that we don't expect. There's some kind of divine energy. That's Uranus. Okay. Coming straight through is Uranus in Taurus is a little bit of like little mini earthquakes, I call them. But it's all this energy on her Jupiter. What is it like breaking open? Okay. And what is it like opening up as it pertains to her, what's unfolding for her for this election. So this is a very key moment. We also have still very volatile. Look at the midheaven of that moment of the full moon. Goodness sakes, we have the 29 because Pluto hasn't moved yet into air. And then we have, Pluto is basically 29 Capricorn. If there ever was a, one last, what I call the death throes of transformation, what I call the death of the old paradigm, is going through the death throe. So it's really reactive, really intense, Capricorn, Saturn type energy. And it can have a revealing of things effect as well. And we have Mars in Leo on that full moon, because now it's at 3 degrees, but it gets all the way to 5 degrees before it actually, 5 or 6 degrees, excuse me, before it goes retrograde. So on December 6th. So I think that's important to point out, because it kind of makes me think that there are things that post-election, within what, 10 days? Yeah, 10 days of the election, we have this full moon, and we're realizing some other things, activities that are happening, and what is being activated. The sun is still in Scorpio, so it's kind of like Scorpio has an intensity of emotion, what it's bonded to, and so it can stir up those things, and those can be die to the ego, as it has been for the rebirth. But how many how many deaths of the ego take place? Sometimes Scorpio, it bears witness to actual death too, and it's a transforming moment. So I'm going to say there's some volatility here, and I don't want to, have people too stressed about it, but I think it's more important to kind of, if you're aware of the potential, you can take care of yourself, and you can take care of those close to you, and those kinds of things. It's kind of being aware that this is very transformational moment over several months, right? So it's not like just one thing. This is not. It's ongoing and back and forth, and difficult things that are transpiring. I mean, we've all gone through a lot of that in, kind of the era between when Pluto first entered Capricorn in 2008, and, the beginnings of that and all that. And then the squares that happened between Pluto and Uranus were very volatile moments. And especially 2015, 2016, Black Lives Matter, and so many of them, and the Me Too movement right in there, 2018-ish. We've gone through a lot as a collective, but I think there's the United States, and we're not the only, there's other things going on in the world that are also very volatile. These positions in the heavens are also volatile for other nations. And so we collectively, as a humanity, how can we take care each other, and I want to point that's very, very important to stress. But these are very difficult times, so it's kind of like if you can create a safe haven for yourself, that's very important to do. And it's also, I think, good to kind of make sure you have relationships with people that you feel supported with, and you have community around you, because these are going to be times that you might need those in your community as well. Okay, just want to point that out. So you can see this stress on that full moon chart, and so it's that full moon is a lot going on. Okay. What else I want to say about this chart? Oh, I also want to point out that the lot of fortune is sitting on Kamilla's Neptune in Scorpio. So this is kind of like the possible of bearing witness to because Scorpio has the ability to uncover things. But when you have Neptune in Scorpio, I have Neptune in Scorpio at 29 degrees, which then progressed into Sagittarius over my life. So it's an interesting combination when it does that. But I think it's interesting to kind of, when your Neptune gets activated, what it pulls up for you. When it's in your 6th house, like it is for Kamala, it's having the powers of investigative, the ability to go super deep into some subject and actually pull up the receipts, as they say. I mean, that's a modern thing, I guess, a contemporary way to say that, but it's being able to pull up the evidence when you're doing something. So this is an interesting combination, because I wonder, is it her communicating, because her Mars is in the 3rd house, her 3rd house. So is she communicating something about some investigative work that's been done, right? Like, let me speak to something so you can see something. You know, I kind of wonder about that, but it is stressed because of Mars at 3 degrees and her own Mercury at 1 degree of Scorpio. So it has a tension, very tension, an obstacle. But she has presented before, and if you know, I think by just looking at the pattern of somebody, their ability to communicate something challenging, she has the chops to do so. Okay, I'm gonna say that. Let's see here. What else do I want to point out on Kamala's chart about the full moon? I think I've covered a lot. Yeah, I've covered enough there. Okay, continuing on. This is the progressions for November 5th on her chart. The sun, I think I've already, this is from a Placidus standpoint. I think I've already covered some of that in the last one, even though it was whole sign. The moon is in the first house for the people, but it's also emotions, you know, and feeling taken care of. I mean, that's a moon in Cancer. It's going to take care. And awareness of that. She's aware, you know, people aware of the emotions. I'm going to continue on. Oh, I wanted to look at her chart, her Placidus progressed, just to see the degree. Oh, yes, this is what I wanted to point out as well. I was looking at, when you look at progressed charts, you look at planets when they're stationing, direct or retrograde, whatever, because when a planet is stationing in the progressed chart, it has extra power to it, like phenomenal. So when I saw her progressed chart, her Uranus has been stationing for a bit of time, and here it is it's showing stationing, and that kind of caught my eye, and I was looking at that, so I wanted to explore that, because it takes, you know, it can be stationing in, especially an outer planet like that in the progressions, but because it's stationing, it does have extra power on it. So there's an extra liberating factor to it. And you know, in Virgo, it's liberating parts of the identity around values. So it kind of makes me wonder about this squaring off with this energy of her chart, because that's a Virgo Uranus, and it's stationing, so it's extra powerful, and it's opposite the Chiron in Pisces, other people's values, the wounds around that, and she has a liberating factor to it. So does her work support some kind of healing, because it's liberating from something that was believed? There's a potential in terms of the values and how it can have an effect. Now, she's not controlling that. That's like a extra energy, divine energy coming in from the progression, like in the chart of, like, I would say, like, I would be looking at it as potential for destiny, right? But she's just the vehicle for something potentially for that, okay? But it's not easy, because that energy squares the nodes of her progressed chart. It squares the Mercury, squares the vertex, squares the sun, you know? So there's a lot to it, okay? But those fire energies of her progressions are still in the same element of the rising sign of the progressed chart. Supportive, right? Of taking the action to do the thing. Having the education, the higher education to do it as well, because she had to go through a lot of education to become what she was to become. Okay, that's a part of that as well. All right. Okay, so moving along. Oops. Here we go. We covered that. That's the Placidus perspective, progressions. Okay. And this is the I believe this is the, solar arcs. This is her solar arc chart. This is another technique. It basically, a solar arc is a degree a year over a person's life. So it's basically the person's chart as it's turned, basically it's through the course of the life. And so you can see that the sun in the solar arc chart is the same as the sun, because everything is based off the calculations of the sun's movement. And so she was born with a Libra sun, but her solar arc chart has the sun, and so does the progress chart, at Sagittarius, 28 degrees of Sagittarius. Okay, so that's just recently, over 4 years ago, went over her south node, and interesting, she rose to the vice president position, the first in terms of being a woman vice president, and also her background, culture background, and so forth, being a vice president. So it's kind of interesting that as that sun went over that south node, it's kind of like rising her up in that regard. And but it's still, we're still at 28 degrees, and her role in that. But here we are. Remember, she's a full moon birth, and the moon is arced, but the midheaven of the solar arc is at 21, and the Jupiter is at 20 and 21. So that midheaven is kind of interesting about the solar arc connection to the current moment. Okay. I also look at the solar arc of Jupiter is now in the second house of values in Cancer. So it has a lot of power there, but it's interesting that it squares her natal moon, and it's continuing to, like, over the next 3 years will square off on that. And also it will square, in 3 years, like this intense square between that very strong Jupiter in Cancer and squaring off with her own Libra sun. And so it just has this tension to it, but Jupiter is a benefic, and it's uplifting. So it kind of has a value to it. And it's a value, I think, also that it's sextile to her own natal Jupiter. So there's something to value about the Jupiter of this period of time for Kamala Harris, okay, and the power there. The other things I look at when I'm looking at a solar arc chart is other things that are like right on the nose in terms of transformation of, higher outer personal energy, like transpersonal energy. And there it is. Pluto is on her Neptune, and it's interesting. It's two transpersonal planets. Solar arc exact-ish, within a 6-month window here, because you're usually looking at about a 6-month window. You could maybe take it to a year because it may be still active on such the strength of outer planets, but it's that 16 degrees of Scorpio, super important because of the Pluto activation there from a solar arc perspective, and the work that she's, the transformation of her own, kind of like the purpose of that, her born in that period of time in the 60s, and then having it realized into the Neptune, like how it might participating in something in the collective consciousness from her work and what she investigates, right? Like the transformational of that, or the work that has a lot to do with death. I mean, there could be some of that. I mean, to be honest, she was the vice president during the period of COVID when we were dealing with a lot of the aftermath of COVID, right? Like, or even that period of time. So there's that in there. Her connection also with Biden, because of all his Scorpio energy. There's something very interesting. It's in her 6th house, though. And it's kind of like the work, the service that she's, in the evolutionary astrology, we look at the 6th house as kind of like what someone's in service to. But when you have outer planets, it's very much transpersonal. It's like you're participating in that collective big thing that's going on anyway. Okay. But also the solar arc here, the Saturn at 29 Aries is interesting because within a 6 months to a year, that will arc into Taurus and will settle down. It actually will have a settle down energy, but the Mars will, by the retrograde position at the early Leo, squares off on that. So that's kind of interesting as well. It's kind of an activator, right? The Mars is an activator to that. And like, so she'll have to bring forward her Aries moon. She's a fighter, so we're going to see it, and how she may activate on that for social justice purpose. What else do I want to point out? Okay, and then solar arc. See the solar, see the arc of that's the south node arcing towards her own Saturn. So to me, I think there is something that the south node brings to her Saturn, something from the past that she will have to be working out and has a responsibility bearing into it. That's Saturn, and her authority is bearing into it, but it's still air. So it's like something from the past that she has to bring forward, and it's activating her Saturn to get to work to do it, right? So, that's interesting. And it might have something related to the law. So it kind of makes me wonder about, like, if Kamala Harris is elected to the president position, that what she might do in our courts, we have the executive branch, but also the judicial branch, right? So what does she do with the judicial branch in her position, if as a part of that? So yeah, that's be interesting to see how that might have something from the past come forward, be revisited for her, if that's the case, right? So that's interesting as well. And a Mars in Libra by solar arc is, it's not conjunct her sun for another 6 years. So there's something to that. So I wouldn't say that's important. I look more for squares. And I don't see that. It's more like it's more of a trine energy of air to her ascendant. We don't often talk about the trines of the solar arcs. We kind of look more for the challenges in astrology, but there is maybe something to that. So there's a Mars being activated in some ways. So in terms of what she may act upon by how she speaks about peace, and because her Mars is in the third house of how she communicates things out, and with Libra essence of social justice, equality, equanimity, peace, and those kind of that's intention underneath that sun, right? So I think that's important. Okay. All right, we have covered Kamala Harris on many points, and so I think some of the things are, whether she is the one chosen or not, she's going to be facing a very difficult period of time in terms of that Mars Pluto opposition. That is like so important. And so maybe what's unraveling in the next 10 days is important to kind of give us the preface for that, because it does spark that. But it's December 6th when Mars stations. And so we might get another piece of information relative to the themes of that. And then it's how it plays out over the weeks into February next year. So February 23rd, another very, very important date, 6 p.m. Pacific time. So that's 9 p.m. Eastern time, that Mars stations direct. And Jupiter stations direct February 4th. And that's also important. That's an important date as well. So in the sign of Gemini. So these are some important dates that if you were kind of like being an observer, which I think is an important exercise as someone who's studying astrology, interested in astrology, it's these moments of transformation are built on weeks and months and years. And we are in a period of time in the United States where who sits in the positions of power absolutely has a transformational effect on the collective, and how we can hopefully release some of the, in time, maybe not right away, but in time, release some of the polarization where we are, where we're sitting in the high polarization. How do we release that? How do we become more, middle of the road, as they say? And so there's a path for that, how we can look for the evidence, look how we will articulate ourselves, the education, looking at our history, looking at our patterns, and how we will operate as we move forward. These are all very important. So Vice President Harris has some positive things for supporting her in this election period, but she's going to have a lot, and collective people will have a lot they're going to have to navigate anyway in the coming weeks, especially 2020. And I'll do another video for the astrology of 25 and 26 and 27. It's kind of like a 5-year period, but definitely 25, 26 is really hot. Actually, 25, 26, 27, really hot. But we will get into those in time, and trying to focus on just the election period. Okay, so another thing. Okay, we're going to jump into Donald Trump's chart now, and to kind of look at the astrology about where his chart is sitting, or like have a little bit of information if someone who's new to astrology hasn't seen his chart. This is Donald J. Trump's chart, June 14th, 1946, 10:54 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. He's born in Queens, New York, at Jamaica Hospital. This is the Placidus chart. Here is an interesting, one of the interesting things about Donald Trump's chart is he has a 29 degrees, 55-minute ascendant in Leo. And a lot of us can actually understand the Leo kind of, we use it like in terms of the energy of the ego having an expression. It's also, Leo is also how we might put ourselves into the spotlight. So his ascendant is all about being in the spotlight. He also has Mars sitting at 26 degrees of Leo, 46 minutes. He's going to be very, very vocal and expressive and very Martian in terms of how he expresses a Gemini sun. Okay, you have to remember that Leo is ruled by the sun. So where does that sun sit in Donald Trump's chart? It sits in Gemini. Excuse me. Okay. With his sun in Gemini, he was born on, you can see eclipse period because his sun is so close to the North Node. And his moon is also full, within a degree of being full. So, but enough to like warrant how close it is to being full. And that his south node is Sagittarius at 20 degrees. His moon is at 21 degrees Sagittarius. But his moon, he was born with the moon on the south node. From an evolutionary astrology standpoint, this is really, really important in a couple of things related to his dynasty, the family dynasty he comes out of. But also, Sagittarius has its beliefs, is emotions connected to its beliefs, and then also family, housing, these kinds of things, which are part of his history. His relationship with his mother and father, of course, is the 4th house, 10th house combinations that we're looking at. So to understand Donald J. Trump, we have to look kind of at his family history, understand his father, understand his mother, and then his his mind as a youngster, and what he was conditioned to believe about himself. And so that's always in the mix of someone in what they may reveal in their spiral of their life as in adulthood. Okay, it's also important to point out that Donald J. Trump was born with Uranus in Gemini at 17 degrees of Gemini. So very close to his sun, very close to his north node. So in evolutionary astrology, we also look at Uranus as a planet that often is an indicator of where trauma exists within the consciousness, but also the volatility that presents from the essence of that, wherever it sits, right? Because it's so connected to his sun. So there, just by looking at that kind of picture of his astrology from an evolutionary standpoint is, he's going to be working some things out, but it's very much that it's going to be activated by what he puts out in the world through his ascendant. Okay. And so he'll have a dynamic life, absolutely. And he will be working from an emotional standpoint because the Gemini has the Mercury in Cancer, where he has the feeling nature of how he thinks. So he the way he processes what he perceives and how he communicates is through his feelings. Okay. With a moon in Sagittarius, so he puts out his beliefs, but he's learning something South Node. Okay, so South Node is very much of something from the past. So we can go back past childhood, but we could also go past life. So this is a potential individual soul. It's got a past life memory coming back, and okay, universe, set it up again. Let me work out this detail, right? So he gets a big stage. He's got a sun in the 10th house. He gets a big stage from that, and he has a Leo rising, so he's going to be putting himself out there again from that perspective, right? And indeed, that's true. He's had a big stage. He has the South Node is ruled. The ruler of the South Node is Jupiter. So Jupiter is also a very important component of understanding Donald Trump's chart. And so the Jupiter in Libra is stationing on his birth, so has a very powerful Jupiter. And so this powerful Jupiter is, he was born in the day, so it actually is a very supportive energy towards, from an air trine to his Uranus. So he will have unexpected things that fly in his favor that people will go, how did that happen? Well, he's got that Jupiter. That Jupiter is stationing, so it's pretty powerful. But and it's also in his second house for a Placidus standpoint, but it's in a third house of communication from a whole sign perspective. I look at both, okay? But I think it's important to kind of keep in mind he also has Chiron close by. There's something about relationships that is a wounding, like how he carries the wound around relationships in being incarnate, and about his self-worth, right? So his self-worth is very much tied into this equation about, relationships and these kind of things. So he's a strong, square between Saturn, which is difficult, but he's born in the day. So it's like not as difficult as Mars is for him. He's born in the day, so Mars is actually more challenging. But Saturn and Venus together, squaring off on that Jupiter, is kind of interesting because it's a square that he has to work through. That's kind of like you've got to work with this, because a Saturn in Cancer is actually in a sign that it's opposite a sign that it rules. So Saturn rules Capricorn, which would be opposite, right? And so he also has the vertex, which is a faded point at 22 degrees of Capricorn, which is interesting because his vertex point, which is a faded point, he was the president of the United States when COVID hit the world. And so isn't that interesting that is in his chart like that? And then his Saturn is opposite at the anti-vertex, which is also kind of like a faded to like the well-being of, dealing with that. And I know that when he was president, dealing with that and having to manage through that himself in early days. Okay. But there may be something related to that is something we also become aware of at this period of time. That comes out. I don't know. That's interesting because it seems like a South Node thing because the moon rules the Cancer. So when he had the authority and responsibility for the United States and its citizens during that period of time, what were things that transpired maybe that were, part of his being woundedness in things that cross borders as the moon in Sagittarius, and having, how he managed that. All right. There's a responsibility when you're in a position of power and how he managed that. There could be things that still reveal there as a part of what's going on right now. Okay. I do not dig a lot on that myself in terms of how I might follow the news or not. But I think that's relevant. But he still has a very strong Jupiter that throws up this trine energy, and that's probably why a lot of things don't stick on for him. It also, most recently, there was an event at a rally that he had where an assassination attempt, which is very concerning and for anyone. But I mean, just the slight turn of the head, and that changed his fate in that moment. I mean, that's also kind of these unexpected things that can happen, right? So that is interesting that some astrologers will look at that and it's like surviving that, and that maybe that's a part of that mix of having the Jupiter trine that energy in an unexpected event like that, and the timing of the event, right, and how that played out. I'm sure there may be other astrologers who explored that, so it's worth maybe looking into that. Another thing I want to point out is his moon in Sagittarius is trine, and the south node is trine the ascendant, and that trine gives access to actually communicate his beliefs out. And so it's very powerful in that. And it's also a powerful combination when you think about when he was in the presidential seat from 2016 through 2021, and all of those, that period of time, like you think about the Supreme Court and the federal judges that were put into place with the communicating out his beliefs and how that would land into the courts. That's Sagittarius courts, right? So there's something interesting about that, right? Another thing on his natal chart is I think this is super important, okay? When we're talking about Uranus, okay? Because we have his midheaven, which is 24 degrees of Taurus, okay? And that is where Uranus is sitting. So we'll take a look at that in the transit chart. But that, I think, is so critical at this moment. And that Uranus then is also squaring his Mars. And so there's an intensity of him getting something unexpected as it relates to his professional persona, okay? The persona that is out in the public and what people perceive. And he's going to have a stressful combination here, okay? So though he has these things underneath where I just kind of wonder about, like, he definitely feels like with the Uranus on his midheaven, there's unexpected things that can transpire. But it's because of what's been communicated out through the Mars. Okay. He also has to still be careful of, unknown enemies with the Mars. The Mars is still in his 12th house of unknown enemy. A known enemy is more 7th house, okay? Like your open enemy, the enemy you would know and actually go to court with, that is more 7th house, and that would be Aquarian, 29 degrees Aquarian. But it's more, and Saturn, okay? So a Saturn figure could be his known enemy, but the unknown enemy is more Mars Leo type, and so more likely like to enact something unexpected like that, okay? And especially with and that's maybe when we look at the astrology, maybe for that moment of the assassination attempt, that would be in that chart. I don't know. I've not dove into that myself, but that, I think at this period of time, it's very important to kind of take into consideration the Uranus on his midheaven. That is like an unexpected thing, unexpected results, and these kind of things for his ongoing public persona. Okay. This is Donald Trump's chart from the whole signs perspective, just so you have another way to kind of see things from whole sign houses. As you can see here, I like to move between whole sign houses and Placidus houses to kind of get a feel for how things sit within the chart from those perspectives, because it kind of gives me a different kind of lens, because this kind of emphasizes the 5th house of that moon in the Sagittarius South Node moon. And so to also kind of, you can add in 5th house is the house of children, but it's also the house of things that we creatively create. And so what your project is that you creatively create could be something of your children. So his children are a part of that, the Jupiter, and so his children may bring to him are some lessons on the South Node. And then his children will also have to play out some of those lessons as being part of his legacy and so forth. So there's a lot going on at that fifth house, and how then they, how they think about him in terms of how he's presented himself to the world. Okay, that's very much a part of his life, right? And that's important. But I think that's nice to point that out. Okay. Let me see, where was it here? Okay, next one. Let's see. This is the beginning of election day for Donald Trump. And this is the Placidus chart, so we can see kind of what is being activated from where on the election day at 7 in the morning, right? So definitely we see his ascendant is absolutely being activated. So loud and proud out, very loud. Lot of out there communication, but we got Mars in Leo as well. Groups are going to be that are connected to him, speaking out, these kinds of things. We also have this combination down here. Look at this. This is very interesting to me because we have the moon has returned into Sagittarius at the time of the election, though it's going to exit the same day. So it's activating his South Node. It's activated his South Node in the days up to this. And so like today, tomorrow, and then, definitely getting activated in a big way on the South Node themes. And the Venus in Sagittarius at 22 degrees is Venus is like a gift, but from, in terms of a benefic, but she is stronger for people born at night. That's traditional astrology, but, she's still, a benefic. But for Donald, his natal Venus is getting stressed with Mars recently going over it, but it's still actively conjunct within 5 degrees, right? So there's a stress on that Venus, so it's not as powerful otherwise. But when Mars goes back and then back into Cancer, it actually stresses the Venus even more. And then back over the Saturn, these are points where when the Mars is doing its retrograde, it's really challenging his anything Libra Taurus in his chart. So it's challenging his ability to communicate in a Libra way. So that third house of communications perception is really challenged when the Mars returns into the cardinal sign of Cancer when it's in its retrograde process, and I'll go over his Venus. So there's something around maybe a young woman that is maybe revealed at that moment. Then when the Mars goes over the Saturn, then it's like around being in a position of authority and that kind of theme. And then we're talking about South Node because the moon is absolutely connected to his Cancer, sign of Cancer, of his 11th house. And interesting, when you're looking at it from an evolutionary astrology standpoint, the Cancer in his chart, Cancer and Capricorn, are the sign of Cancer and the sign of Capricorn are not on the cusp of a house, so they're kind of blocked in. And so that is a challenging kind of a challenge that the individual finds it more challenging, at least from the evolutionary astrology standpoint, has it more challenging of getting at those archetypal energies to express them in a way that supports their life in a fashion that you know what I mean? So it's kind of like that's a very challenging. It's even more challenging from that perspective of thinking of intercepted signs like that, because they have a harder time of being realized by the individual. So that means that the South Node combination of the moon in Sagittarius, the South Node in Sagittarius of his birth chart, playing out through his Mercury, how he feels and thinks and perceives things, his Saturn, his understanding of authority, what he needed emotionally there, and then what he then expresses is just challenged because it has a hard time getting to that. Now, this is an evolutionary perspective, okay? And Venus as well. His need for beauty, his need, and how he assesses that, right? It has a difficulty of actually getting to understand that. So, yeah, so that's interesting about that, right? What else? Well, this is of the morning of the election, right? And so we also have Jupiter. So we have Uranus on the midheaven right there. And that Uranus, hello, is coming, it's 25, but it's coming back through the retrograde, and it's going to be more exact on the around the new, excuse me, the full moon on November 15th, 16th. That's that over that. I'll have to verify the exactness. That's 2418. I believe that's the case. It might be in the full moon chart, and I'll show that in just a minute. And the Jupiter is sitting on his north node. So this north node, the Jupiter sitting on the north node gives, there is it does accentuate. Jupiter is the benefic of, especially for those born in the day. Venus is the benefic for those born in the night, traditional astrology. But from evolutionary astrology, this arc of a life is getting Jupiter sitting on it. And it's from a retrograde position, Jupiter retrograde. Revisiting something, yeah, because he was the president before, so maybe this is revisiting that, and here he is on deck in the election. And so there's like, how is the energy supporting that or challenging that, right? So he's got the strong position with Jupiter there. So, but there's a big but in my statement here. And when you study multiple things of astrology, I have evolutionary astrology in one, and then I've also studied traditional astrology. And traditional astrology is kind of like looking at things from points in time, like when other periods of time, what we look at, right? So I didn't do Zodiacal Releasing, and you can look into other astrologers, which there'll be information when I release this as a recording. We'll have links to other astrologers. I am of an astrologer. Like, I think it's good to explore different thoughts. I don't care about my ego in terms of putting other astrologers out there for you to examine and explore. I think it's important to kind of look at all sides of the coin and see all the parameters. What I think is important about traditional astrology as it pertains to Donald Trump and this election is that he's in a 7th house annual profection. And so that means we want to look at the 7th house and what's going on with the 7th house and the 7th house ruler in his chart. Well, Saturn is the traditional ruler of Aquarius. Only modern astrologer looks at Uranus as a co-ruler of Aquarius. So I'm not going to discuss too much on traditional astrology of Uranus, even though it is a very important planet at the mix. So 7th house. Saturn is present in the 7th house from a Placidus perspective. So I actually need to move the chart to whole sign. Let me see here. Can I do that? Do I have that? One second here. Do I have it in whole sign? Here. Yeah, here we go. So this is the chart I want to show you because this is going from the traditional astrology perspective, 7 a.m. on election day as we're going into the day, okay? The moon, as we start the day, is in the 5th house. A lot of fire energy, a lot going on, activity, beliefs, things like that. Then it'll shift into the 6th house for Donald Trump. But we also look at Saturn. He's 78 years old, so his annual perfection is a 7th house annual perfection, and the Lord of that is Saturn. So we look, where's Saturn in his chart? Saturn is in his 12th house of Cancer in traditional astrology, traditional astrology. And it is, so basically it's a part of the unconscious mind stuff, collective connection and those kinds of things. And also, part of, that part of himself in there. And then it's also, so that's a Saturn that is not in an air sign. It's in a it's in the water element, but you have a Saturn up here in the 8th house. So it's in aversion 2 times. The transiting Saturn is in aversion, meaning the 7th house can't see it, okay? Nor can him as the 1st house Leo see that Saturn. So it doesn't support that. And it's also in aversion to the actual natal. So it also doesn't see it. So there's an aversion to it. So it's a challenging position. So I would argue that it's a bumpy ride for Donald Trump during this election period, but it's going to activate him emotionally, right? And his idea of authority. So how that may pan out. But I'm so curious about how this position of Uranus, that is the unexpected thing. And astrologers who want to say, I'm going to predict this or that or whatever, you're talking Uranus here. And you're talking things that can be very upsetting. And then we have all this other tension across the Mars, Leo to Cancer, retrograde process, opposite of Pluto. Very dynamic, fixed. You know, once Pluto's in Aquarius, it's fixed. But when it's in cardinal sign, it is cardinal active. But going into the election, Mars is in Leo, but it will go back into Cancer for sure. So it's kind of like looking at these timing of things, and I think it's going to be just an incredible value for us, who study in astrology. Some astrologers are bent on forecasting. I mean, that's just, they think it's their responsibility to do so. But if you're coming from a different practice of astrology that cares about, something else, then it may be that you'll hear this, how some astrologers will be hesitant to forecast and predict. We can predict, like we can forecast the archetypal energies at play, but I think there is something about allowing free will also, because a lot of people may lean into something that's based on a prediction and how that can play out. And I think there's a social responsibility. This is my take on this, okay? I think there's a social responsibility of, I can share the information, but it is up to each individual how they perceive something, how they communicate something, and what they take action on. Because your Mars is how you take action on something. and then you're also maybe having to respond. That is also your Mars. So your Mars may be like, how I'm going to respond, or how I might deal with something. That is also Mars, what you're passionate about. So there's different combinations, and every consciousness participating, like not just in the United States. We have people in other countries that are paying very close attention to what happens in the United States in this moment and in the weeks and months to come. Very, very important. So I want to point out that it's very important to kind of take a look at different perspectives. I think that's important. And then weigh in on, okay, this astrology has pointed out these interesting archetypal energies that present positive lift of potential, but it's also speaking to challenges, squares, and oppositions, or inconjuncts of energy that are difficult for the individual to navigate. And both candidates are navigating that energy over the next several months. So if Vice President Harris wins the election, I can guarantee you that we will hear more on the stage in some way and in capacity from Donald J. Trump. That's for sure. If Trump wins the election, there will be a lot of movement about looking into the information as well. And there will be challenges within that will present collectively, both for the U.S. and for our allies. So there's challenging months either way. Okay, I want to point that out. Okay, what else do I have to share about Donald J. Trump? it's going to be interesting because of that Lord of the year for his annual perfection being Saturn and what is positioning for Saturn. Yeah, and it's very interesting because 7th house is not just his significant partner, his wife, but also open enemies. Okay, so that is interesting. The position and the challenge that can present. Yeah, for him as well. The unexpected thing on his midheaven of his public persona is kind of the thing to be paying attention to. Okay. Any questions so far on what I've got? We are at 3 p.m. or 10 after 3 Pacific time. Whatever that is for you. So I've been talking for 2 hours now and 10 minutes. So just taking a moment so I can read any comments that you guys may have. Have I not, if I haven't answered one of the questions specifically or explicitly that you wanted to hear, please let me know. Let's see here. What else do I have for you? Oh yeah, I was going to look at Donald Trump's secondary progressions as of election day. So this is another indicator of very challenging emotional period of time for Donald Trump, because his progressions, which is 78 days after his birth in 1946, this shows that his moon is in Scorpio, and that's a challenging emotional time. And underneath as well. And it's kind of in the first, it's not quite up to the, is it the first? No, it's only sextile. So that's a crescent moon moving towards a square but that's a couple years out when it gets to the square to the progressed sun. So this is an deeply emotional time for him. Okay, and then we have, this is interesting. He has his natal Pluto at 10 degrees of Leo. The midheaven is so close to that, but the progressed midheaven is kind of an interesting thing. So I'm careful with that, how it's calculated sometimes. But the Saturn is in Leo at 3 degrees. That's interesting. The Saturn at 3 degrees Leo is where the Mars is going to be moving in the next couple of weeks, because it's at 0 degrees of Leo, but maybe by the full moon it's at 3 degrees. I'll have to double check on that full moon chart. That's interesting. That Saturn in Leo square that moon is really difficult. Yeah. I mean, it has, yeah. Not only that, the progressed Mercury is within a degree of his Mars in Leo. So that kind of makes me wonder about how he communicates out things by the way he's feeling. Yeah. And his, his public, the way, what he gives the world, his mask to the world. But underneath, there's a very difficult Scorpio moon, very intense. The progressed Saturn in Leo is in detriment, and it is activated when the Mars is retrograde December 6th, 2024, and through February of 2025. So that point definitely gets activated for sure, plus this part of his chart with the Saturn and Venus there in his chart. Other progressions of note. I just look for the fastest moving things, which are usually the moon. The sun is about 1 degree per year. And Mercury. Those are the fastest moving things. But he has this kind of stellium going on here in Libra. Progressions of Neptune, Mars, Chiron, Venus and Jupiter, and Juno, which is the partner. This is interesting. So there's a lot that's activated under relationships, and balance and fairness and those kinds of things. But those are also square to his Saturn and Venus. So to me, there's a lot that is there's a lot going on as it pertains to his what's happening in the unconscious mind around his feeling nature and what's been restricted there. The desire nature as well, also some restriction. That's just square. So it kind of makes me wonder about that. But all of that is also trying to this part of his chart. So there's a lot going on there. So that Jupiter, progressed Jupiter 25, it's not really exactly on, but it's still in a that is trying this area of his chart. So there's still a lot of friends and allies that favor him. Okay. Oh, let's see here. I got a couple other questions here. Is March? Yeah, I already answered that one. Sandra says, is there anything indicative in February, March next year about his trials and judgments? Good question. Let me see if I have anything. So February, March would be like the Mars retrograde period. Let me see if I have more on that here. Hold on. That's the independent chart. Let me see here. Do I have? I don't have Donald J. Trump. Bear with me here for just a second. I gotta scroll through if I have something on to answer that clearly. I might have to pull up my other. Sandra, I'm gonna maybe have to pull that up towards the end, maybe, because that what you're asking me is probably. Let me go to his. Let me just go to his natal first. So, oh goodness, I really need the, well, this is the solar arc. Let me see if it's in the solar arc. That's November 5th. If there's anything in there. February is just a few months away. March is just a few months away. So we're looking at like November, December, January, February, March. So we're in a 3-4 month window, right? So I would look like, because I kind of look like that would be like a 1/2 degree on the sun and that kind of 1/2 degree movement kind of thing. So that Chiron could move over. That's thing that would shift the, maybe, yeah, because the solar arc of the midheaven transformation going on of his self-identity is going on. But I think a better chart would be probably picking up Donald Trump with, let me see if I can pull this in. Hold on one second. Give me a second. I have to pull a chart. And then I'll see if I can bring it in. Hold on one moment, please. Mars. Aries ingress. Bear with me for a moment, please. Let's go to Saturn ingress. Well, yeah, let's do that. We'll do the Saturn ingress into Aries. Let's see if I can even bring this in. I have to share my stop mode for a moment and come back. Bear with me here for just a second. I have to switch screens. We want this one. All right, can you see this chart? Okay, Sandra, we're going to try to answer your question. So this is Donald's chart, and then we have the Saturn ingress into Aries, which is May. So that's stretching out a little bit further, but it gives us some indicators about what you're talking about. But I might have to just go back and do another chart on something that's more meaningful. Hold on. Mars retrograde period, February. That might be an interesting one, is Mars and its stationing on February 23rd. Let me do that instead. Hold on. Stop this one. Let's do February 23rd. Hold on one second, please. Transits to, we're going to do February. And we're doing 9 p.m. And we'll go, he's in New York, I guess. So we'll just leave it in Queens. We'll just do that. Okay, so here we go. Thanks for your patience while I bring this up. So we'll do Donald Trump. And we'll do, this is the Mars stationing, I believe. And share chart. Window here. Share. Okay. Give me a thumbs up if you can see that, or a heart or something. I don't know how you guys see these things. Always. There we go. Okay, so here's the chart. I don't have my same pointer that I have when I'm doing Zoom, so I just have to use the cursor here. But what we're looking at is just kind of what are the energies in February 23rd. Also in February 4th, the Jupiter would have gone station direct. So now Jupiter is more direct, a couple weeks before that. But Mars is stationing here direct, as you can see, at 17 degrees of Cancer. So the Mars had already passed over by the retrograde cycle through across the Venus and Saturn of his chart. So when that Mars passes over, let me just get my ephemeris. When the Mars passes over the Saturn, and this is of course before his next birthday, so Saturn is still very important because it is the Lord of the year for him until his birthday. That period of time is important because Mars is like the trouble that comes. And the trouble that comes is, or the expression of the ego, but this is a Mars in Cancer. So it's very, very much activating things of the unconscious mind, right? And so I think it's important to look at, we have February, right? But we're looking at when that actually is more conjunct his by its retrograde over his natal Saturn, which is within days of the inauguration. So Sandra, good point. Trials and judgment, this is an interesting activator. January 22nd, 23rd, 24th. So basically I would make the argument that it's across the Venus. Mars is, definitely activating that point of his place of his chart during when inauguration is happening. But you got to keep in mind that Mars is not, is just being the activator. It's not, you have to keep in mind that the Lord of the year is is what is manifest, what is being challenged, what is being activated. So I kind of wonder about people who he's activating himself, but he also activates other people because we have his moon in Sagittarius, right? So there's still another activation. So there's something to keep in mind that's getting activated. People are getting activated by him. Okay. And it's important to also keep in mind other points. So we kind of look at, this is right close to this part of the chart. So the Saturn in Pisces, the North Node, the node has been moved into the Pisces since then, with Neptune in Pisces. There's just one thing after another here. Plus the Saturn and also Mercury. So a lot of water energy, emotions and feelings. But this is from a Placidus. We're looking at actually a whole sign house system here. So this is water element highly activated, right? But he's in a 7th house perfection. So, where's the moon in that moment? The moon is at 13, almost at 14 degrees of Capricorn. So to me, that's the moon is excuse me, the moon is activating the independent vote chart of the United States of America. That's what I call more of a very key chart for the United States of America, and us separating from the king, King George, back in 1776, right? That was people put their lives on the line for that vote, and so it's activating that, and then the moon is moving in transit. Of course, moon is the fastest thing that we're looking at here. And the moon is moving towards the opposition with the Mars. Okay, so this is acting out from the 12th house, his 12th house. But when we look at it from a Placidus perspective, it switches up a little bit, maybe into I believe that's maybe in the 11th, excuse me. But I would argue that I'm looking at it from a traditional standpoint. So my lens is he's getting activated. It's emotional, and there's a it's actually landing on this part of the chart where the people of the United States might, the position here is he's getting activated. But if this is the moment of inauguration, I mean, there is no situation that we had like in 2021 where he's in the White House and we're having to do something for the change of the transfer of power there. This is still interesting because this is like if he's heading into, or if Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, is entering, now the inauguration has happened on, a month before, what is being activated by him or by the people in response to that, you see? So it's kind of interesting. You mentioned something about his trials and judgments, and I think this is interesting because it's the Mars. That's that Mars Mars is telling me that he's being activated. His persona that he is masked, that he is shared with his world, is very active, like an emotional sense. And there's a lot of passive aggressive behavior possibly being activated from what's going on underneath it all. But it activates other people, and maybe even in relation to his spouse in some way. I don't know. There's something there. Trial. So if you're thinking about legal stuff, that's 9th house for a person. So if he's having to manage through things of legal stuff that's kind of coming to the fore, that is Jupiter. And that would be 9th house things and what's going on with Jupiter in the moment. And that then is now forward in Gemini, and that Jupiter is going to go over his Uranus, unexpected things. Then his North Node, and kind of that arc of the life, and then the Sun in Gemini. So that Jupiter is going to march over that. So there is absolutely going to be a lot going on as it pertains to the legal stuff that he's been involved in and may also be involved in the future. So does that clarify, Sandra, the detail that you're asking me here? Remember, he has a very powerful Jupiter natally. So it can be somewhat of a slippery slope when that Jupiter goes over his Uranus and then goes over his North Node and goes over his Sun. So here's the thing. I want to kind of like put it in the position of a perspective of this and that, because that's very Gemini, this and that, two things that you're looking at, right? If he is sitting president of, he's one, and if that's the reality, then we're looking at the things that he faced may fall, and he will extricate can't say that word, from those, and will be in a position of power to not be held responsible for those kinds of things that were engaged for him. Mercury, where's Mercury? Mercury's in Pisces, and Mercury is in its fall in Pisces, so it doesn't bode well for him. So if I were to look at it on the flip side, I would say that if Vice President Harris is the sitting president, this is where the reality of those cases comes full, and it's not in his favor. There's a lot of Pisces energy that squares off on his Sagittarius South Node, North Node in Gemini. So that, to me, that's just like happening like that. And so it's kind of like that. It's not in his favor. So I would say that and just because of the progress chart, I would say he's in an emotional period of time, but then he acts out some things. And so I would make that argument more. I would lean into that. And I would say that it looks like it's very challenging for Donald Trump in 2025, but he's going to be acting out some things. But we're also on the world stage. We're going to have to be dealing not just what's going on in the home turf, but also what's going on in the world, because we have other things that are rising right now that are definitely really challenging for us collectively. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Okay, so I think I covered that to the extent that I want to cover. Now, remember, we have a period of time coming where Neptune is going into Aries, and and also Saturn goes into Aries, and this is a period that is a very big paradigm change for the collective. They make a conjunction in 2026, and I think that's important to point out, because we have these outer planets making these big changes, because those collectively change us and how we're stepping forward. In the moment right now, we are still at the 29 degrees of Capricorn of Pluto, and so it's very challenging to see beyond that scope because we're in it. Okay. But we're definitely in a transformational period for all of the United States, but also how we are collectively managing through these as just human beings on planet Earth, and all the things that we are working out individually and collectively. Okay, well, I'm going to bring back my slides. So hold on one moment, please, so I can share my slides again. All right, can you see that okay? Oh, that's my wait a second, that might not be the right one. One moment, please. I want the window, but I think I want, where is it? Okay, there we go. Okay, we're back on the chart here. Get rid of that ribbon. Hold on. Hold on, I want to view. Bear with me with the window. There we go. That's not working. Anyway, Can you guys see the chart still? Okay. Okay, that is finishing. I think just the detail on the question that you had asked me. Oh, Komilla, you're asking me about doing a live about the year 2025. Yes, that's probably a whole nother, because we can step through the charts of 2025, which would include the Neptune into Aries, the Saturn into Aries, the finishing detail of the energy of the Mars retrograde when it finally comes out of that retrograde for us collectively. There's also, the continuation of Pluto in Aquarius, kind of how that's opposed with that Mars. Those are all part of that. But then we also have Uranus entering into Gemini, and that will lift things really quickly. That's like a quickening. But there's a lot of activity around that because of how it is in the United States charts. So let me just wrap up what I have done for, I guess it would be, I think I've covered enough on Trump to kind of get a sense of the emotional, the past life, kind of bringing up to this moment, all the things, and the collective. I think it's about the most important thing about kind of looking at it from a macro picture is the United States people and the idea of the United States, how it became the birth of our nation, was the first act was to separate from King George. And so that moon in Capricorn of that independent vote chart opposite the sun, I think is so important, and how that brings us to this moment. And like we are kind of almost enacting a very similar thing from a Pluto in Virgo, Pluto in Capricorn scenario in terms of our transformation. And then we've already seen the transformation that when former President Trump was a president, how that changed our courts, and that's the Saturn at the top of the chart, and that how that bears into our future. I think all of these are a part of the equation, but I think I'd like to think of things in a macro level, but we're also looking at micro level at the individual charts. But collectively, it's almost like we're enacting the same thing. We're trying to throw off the kind of king personality, that idea. So I think that's something to take into consideration at this time, but it will not go down without a fight. But the thing is it'll be internally, but there will also be external things going on externally in the world that are also having to navigate the whole Mars retrograde opposite Pluto. And then when Uranus goes into Gemini, that has historically been a really dynamic period of time for war activity, at least from the United States. And I would encourage you to look at like Nick Dagan-Best's astrology for some of that historical point of view. He has an incredible detail on that that I would call out. So in the notes below, I will have some links on the description of this live for those who are interested in kind of sitting and listening to his astrology as well. But you can also read Gary's write-ups on his website are incredible. And with his history, being a history teacher, it's phenomenal how he writes it. So I just want to point that out. Other things, we've had the Pluto ingress, the first one, and the second one's on November 19th. That's the big shift that we're returning to. And with the full moon just a couple days before that, that's huge. And then here's the chart for the Neptune Aries ingress that's happening March 30th next year. So these are some of the things that I can get into for another live, and we can dive a little bit more into these ingress charts, because ingress charts are so valuable to give you kind of a peek at what that planet's first ingress kind of gives us, and from, say, a particular location such as Washington, D.C. or something like that. But you can also do it for your own, my evolutionary astrology, like my astrology practice is focused for the individuals that would come to me that would be looking for guidance on, their soul, their life arc, and what's the purpose, and where am I at in this moment in time, and looking forward, looking backward, kind of what are the patterns. And so I do this kind of thing on YouTube to share that astrology. So if people need help through a period of time, I can give you some insights, and just to kind of give you some guidance along the way. So we will do another live on maybe 2025 and 2026, and maybe even into 2027 kind of astrology. They might have to break those out into 3 different lives because there's so much in each one. Oh, Sandra, you're talking about ancient Chinese. Yeah, the ancient time. Yes. Interesting times ahead indeed. Yes, absolutely. So archetypally, because you have different disciplines of astrology that look at how the astrology of the heavens kind of comes to us and through us on planet Earth. So I would say that some astrologers are looking at it from a tropical zodiac. There are some that are in Vedic, or I think it's Yodish maybe, that use the sidereal. That's a whole nother way of it's a slimmer view, maybe more pointed. But in my astrology links below this live, I will have other astrologers who, they make arguments in another way, or, they are more apt to lean into making a forecast or prediction. I'm giving you the archetypal energies that either or. There is like the Uranus in the equation is the thing that is the unexpected thing. But what side of the camp are you sitting on, right? It's like that. I think it's relative. Because going into, let me just say this, going into the election of 2016, that was an interesting period of time because of how many were predicting one thing versus another, and how upsetting even the those who were predicting. There were a couple who predicted it in astrology, yes, but even the analytic folks who do, just do analytical and modeling, they were caught by surprise too. So I think, outside of astrology, I look at both academics and, those who spend their days modeling things by, trends and things like this. I mean, there's a lot to be gained from a higher education, and astrology is, just another, it's an amazing occult discipline, but it's like you can lean into it as divination, but but there are elements that are happening on a grand scale that I have to bear in mind as the responsibility as an astrologer. So I was like, you have I believe in free will, but I think your free will is operating in the context of something of like what your soul intended this life. And so there's something that both Kamala Harris as a soul intended this life and how that's playing out, and that of Donald Trump also intended this life, and those are playing out, and it's for their soul's evolutionary intentions. But a lot of us get captured into this, and when you get swept up into something, that is Pisces. And with a Neptune in Pisces and a Saturn in Pisces, we can get swept up into something. And then when those move into Aries, we're in a completely different paradigm. But those 2 planets go back into Pisces and then back forward. So it's kind of an interesting mix that it's like the curtain gets dropped on the veil of confusion, but then it goes back in. So there's a dance that we have to go through collectively around these themes, around these illusions that have been up for quite some time, and that we can get swept up in. People can get swept up into things and believing things. Okay, so it is very interesting times, and so I've been, looking at this, and I've been having conversations for some time. Like I had the conversation with Gary Lorenzen, astrologer that I just absolutely adore, and I think his work is absolutely phenomenal. And I would encourage people to read the links that I'm going to be sharing on the site. You can listen to the podcast that I just released this morning. That's on the YouTube channel. You can go look for that as a part of this, and help you kind of take a look at the trends and things from the forming of our nation and where we are at this moment in time. Because in the end, it's kind of like you're an individual, but you're a part of community, and we have a nation that we have people going to the polls, and there's a real responsibility to that, but it's also our right to vote. And goodness, we had women who fought to vote, and a lot of people who, it's important to vote. And so I think I just want to put that as the ending portion of my my live today. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this, and it's giving you a lot of things to think about for the coming weeks. Again, if you have any questions, you're welcome to include them below. If you revisit any of these points on the live when it's posted, because it will be posted on my website. And I know that people had to be subscribed to my channel to join, so I maybe didn't have as big as an audience as normal, but not everybody's going to be interested in politics. I had to shore myself up, to be presenting, because it's such a sensitive topic for us right now because of the polarization in the United States. So, but my hope is that, we're tracking towards where we can lift up other people. We can help people who are right next to us. We're taking care of ourselves, but we're also having to understand where we are. And it's very important to understand where we are in time, and astrology can help us with that. So thank you, everybody, for coming and joining me on this live today. And I, encourage everybody to go vote. And thank you to our folks who are coming from around the world on this live today. I appreciate you as well, because our relationship in the world is, it's really important. I know people are watching what's going on. So I understand that you may have your own interests on like what's going on with the United States. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your Sunday, great week ahead. And Tuesday's big day. So thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. Bye, guys.